Thank you, Chair Winslow and Commissioners. This matter did start off with the two parcels. They had revised it because there had already been a CPCN on the one parcel, so that was withdrawn, and the order reflects that. My apologies that the map does not reflect that.
So we are down to one. With that explanation, I will move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
I second.
Any discussion on the motion to accept?
We've had several hearings on Regulation 56, and at the last meeting, the staff had asked you to finalize a rule, and after reviewing all the comments and everything, the commission decided, no, you want to have another hearing on this on June 5th. So this order merely memorializes that decision and provides that the hearing will be held again on June 5th, where each party will be allowed at least some kind of brief comment on the rule proposed changes. And this is Rule Order 9203, and staff recommends that you go ahead and adopt this rule.
Thank you, Mr. Willard. Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Chair Winslow and Commissioners. Prior to the hearing, I'd handed to Mr. Willard and Mr. Slater our revisions, and I don't know if Mr. Willard is referring to the revised Order 9203. We had added 2 whereas clauses and revised whereas clause, which is now number 10. Whereas clause number 8, we added whereas Commission staff filed its memorandum recommending Commission approve most recent draft regulations. We added that because the chronology we believe should reflect what is in the record, and it simply makes the order complete. The second whereas clause, we changed, instead of having the duly noticed public hearing, because that is inaccurate, it was a regular scheduled meeting. We added that it was a regularly scheduled meeting on March 27th, which the Commission considered whether to approve the proposed Order 9197 or set the matter for hearing. And then we revised what was formerly whereas clause 8, which is now 10, to read the Commission voted not to act on the order and to again set the matter for hearing. And we struck the language held a duly noticed public hearing on March 27th, 2018. That is accurate in terms of the chronology and the record, and we would request that that form of order 9203 with those revisions be approved as the final order.
I can accept those revisions, although, I mean, to me, the March 27th order meeting was duly noticed as well as regularly scheduled. I don't really understand the difference here, but I can accept those changes.
Mr. Slater?
I'm not going to comment on that last part, but I do have 2 questions, and I guess now is the right time. Will there be will the December 5th vote and the reasoning for the vote ever be published? It would be helpful for those that need to re-argue it to know what the argument was before, to tailor our comments. Otherwise, I fear that you're just going to end up with redundant comments for the most part, and I don't know that you want to read, an entire foot long of papers over again. So I just add that as a comment, whether or not we'll see the reason for the December 5th vote in order to potentially tailor our comments to a different, to further the re-argument. I don't know that that was the right time to ask a question, but I just went ahead and did it.
Well, I think it's a good question.
December
Yes.
5 meeting, the commission did vote at that time to adopt the rule or to have it republished in a certain way. But you later changed your mind on that now, and so I'm not sure if that would really be helpful to the reasons that you were doing the one thing you've now reversed, so I'm not sure how helpful that would be. I don't know what Mr. Welch has to say about that.
Chair Winslow and Commissioners, it was, the December 7th hearing was the oral argument,
I'm sorry.
and the
So,
votes
yeah.
on the three issues. Later in February, we were, in January, we came before the commission and requested that the regulations be published. My concern is that at the hearing tentatively scheduled for June 5th, that we stick to the court's directive on remand and stay with those issues, which are the same issues that were heard at the December 7th hearing. I believe it was Commissioner Gray at the last hearing noted that it's in response to Mr. Meyer's exhibit and testimony that it's not about the outcome, and the court made that clear. It's about the rules and the fact that the commission has the statutory authority to promulgate the rules. And the other issues were set forth in Mr. DeLosa's memorandum, which all the parties agreed to prior to the December 7th oral argument. So I would, it would be helpful, as Mr. Slater stated, to know where we are going with respect to those issues, and from staff's part, we would want to stick with the issues that were remanded. That is what is before, that is what the court asked us to do, and we did at the December 7th hearing. All the parties argued those three issues.
I don't think that Mr. Slater was implying, at least I don't believe so, that he'd go beyond the issues that we're here to decide.
It actually brings up a separate issue that wasn't necessarily where I was going to, but in the last meeting, it was mentioned that that the re-argument should be open to all issues, not just the three, and I think perhaps that's what Mr. Walsh is implying, that it should just continue to be the three. And I agree that, this order does, change your mind. I'm just thinking that it might be helpful for the commission if we know why the December vote occurred, in order to not prolong and provide tedious amounts of paper for you to end up reading over again.
Well, from my perspective, we've had 2 rounds of written comment.
The last commission meeting, and I'm sorry it's been a long day, so I didn't bring in the transcript. but I remember at the last meeting, part of the transcript had said that we're not just gonna limit it to 3 issues. And so I just wanna make sure and make it clear that it should still be the 3 issues. And I agree, I don't wanna be redundant and continue to say the same things over again. That's why I thought maybe the reasoning for the vote on December 7th could be a benefit to all parties in order to shorten the amount of work that, is required from us, but also that you have to read.
Well, I believe that you have already some pretty good guidance about
It begs the question, do we know which of the issues is the impetus for having another hearing? It would seem to me, just as a matter of economy, if we know that 2 of the 3 remain.
Mr. Walsh, I can't sit here and tell you which commissioners are worried about issue number 1, which ones are about number 2 and number 3. We didn't discuss it that way in our open meeting. It's fair to say that it may be that all 3 have some sort of question on some commissioner's mind. If there's some additional
Red lines have been either adopted or removed. I don't
Okay,
see
either
any
way,
red lines in this.
we appreciate staff putting the order together, it looks great to us, I just.
The commission approved a settlement, providing that where the change in the total ARAM, the reasonable allowance for retail margin exceeds 5.25%, Delmar would be required to submit a formal filing. And in this case, there's a decrease of 19.61%. So Delmarva did submit a formal filing. Again, as he said, Liberty briefed the commission on February 20 at its meeting, saying everything was done properly with the bids. And so again, the staff recommends that you approve the order, 9205.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
We don't have any comments on the order. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Winslow and Commissioners, Mr. Goodman's recitation is accurate. We have reviewed and crunched the numbers. The percentage is accurate, and we would ask that the Commission approve the order, which is an approval on a temporary basis for usage on or after June 1st, 2018. Of course, that is subject to refund with interest if the Commission determines later that they are in whole or part those rates that is unjust or otherwise violate Delaware law. We've also attached a form of notice for for the publication and the timelines for interested persons to file petitions.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Commissioners? Commissioner Gray?
Sorry,
language relating to the annual rate class review.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Slater?
The Division of the Public Advocate doesn't have anything else to add to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
Filed this in August of 2017. Delmarva filed it. They seek approval of their energy efficiency program that has a consumer products program and a behavior-based program. There was going to be an evidentiary hearing before the commission on May 8th, but we've been looking at this. We've gotten a lot of testimony, a lot of discovery, and we feel it's a pretty complex issue. And we actually proposed an order for today that the commission, rather than have an evidentiary hearing before the commission on May 8th, rather than that, the commission appoint a hearing examiner and have Mr. Lawrence have an evidentiary hearing on the matter. This is a revision to the order number 92-113, or 9213, which is number 5 on the regular agenda. The order is now revised to include the Delaware State News as also getting public notice, along with the Gazette, Cape Gazette and the News Journal. The final clean order will reflect those two revisions. And if there are any questions, Ms. Knotts is available here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Willard. Mr. Slater?
The DPA fully supports staff's petition. We agree that there is a lot of testimony here, and it would be better suited before the hearing examiner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slater. Any other party present that wishes to make any comments on the
moving this idea, since it was Delmarva who requested that it be heard before the staff graciously agreed. It was that we didn't expect there to be a lot of controversy, since it was going through the whole, almost, well, at least 2-year EEAC, Energy Efficiency Advisory Council process. But it has turned into be a little more controversial than we initially expected. And I actually want to compliment staff for bringing this to the forefront, because it would have been a very lengthy and difficult thing to have before you at a regular hearing. I think you probably would have had to bring pajamas and a sleeping bag and maybe some snacks. So, and I also thank the way that Ms. Knotts called and very professionally described to me why staff believe that. So we support it 100%. I think it was a very wise decision on the part of your staff, and not the easiest one to make.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman. Commissioners?
Move we adopt order number 9213 as presented.
And I second.
Any discussion on the motion?
One question for clarification, Mr. Chair. Did I hear that this needs to be revised, for example, on page 2 where Cape Gazette is, on the red line where Cape Gazette is taken out, it needs to be put back?
Could I answer that?
Yes, sure.
Could I answer that?
Yes.
On the first page, it actually was published in January in 3 papers. Typically, we only do the News Journal and the Delaware State News. So I have amended the second page just to include, instead of the Cape Gazette, to just include the Delaware State News and the News Journal.
I got it. It's clear. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion on this order, please?
You have
already have a motion.
Oh, we do, that's right, second, excuse me.
Seconded, yeah.
Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. We have a hearing scheduled today. The one item on is in the matter of the application of Delmarva Power and Light Company for approval of modifications to its gas cost rates. Mr. Goodman.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, this is one we can't push off to hearing examiner Lawrence, but this will, I promise you, will not be painful at all. This is our annual gas cost rate proceeding. You have already allowed rates to go into effect, subject to refund, just like we discussed in the prior two orders that you entered for SOS and RPS. These rates have been in effect, subject to refund, since November 1st of this year. So when we say things like it will amount to an X dollar increase during a winter heating month, that's all behind us now. The winter heating months, I believe, we consider them to end in March, although first part of April wasn't exactly spring weather-wise around here, unless you were lucky enough to be somewhere south. But staff does a very careful look into this with the DPA every year, and we usually end up with a few things to discuss. And fortunately, as in most years, we've been able to reach agreement to make some adjustments. And so in order to save time for the commission and all the costs incurred, we bring it before you through a settlement. You're going to hear Mr. Jacoby, and he's going to talk about something known as upstream capacity, or a couple other names you might hear it referred to. But generally what we try to do is we use what's called a design day. Design day is for us about a 0-degree day, because we want to make sure we have enough gas to provide our customers. We obviously don't want people losing their service in the middle of a terrible cold spell, or having to pay exorbitant what are called fines by the pipelines because we needed more than we had arranged for. So we like to carry a reserve capacity about 2% more than our design day. If you'll recall, we had a really historic setting cold snap that I think someone used the term bomb cyclone to describe that. 3 weeks of just ridiculous temperatures. While no one day set a record, combined it did set a record for the amount of gas we had to send out. And instead of having a 2% reserve, we have, in our design day, we had a -4%, meaning we didn't have enough to meet our design day. That was an issue that was very collaboratively discussed with DPA and staff, and we were able to reach an agreement on how to handle that, which you'll hear about today. So with that background, just so you kind of know what you're talking about, Mr. Jacoby is a lot smarter than me and knows all the terminology, and I get lost sometimes. And with you not doing this full-time all the time, I don't want to leave you in the same situation. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jacoby, if I may, and have him sworn in.
Sir, do you swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Your full name?
James B. Jacoby.
Okay. Mr. Jacoby, would you just, again, state your name for the record?
James B. Jacoby.
I haven't figured out why we always make you do that twice, but it seems like what we normally do. Can you tell us who you work for?
I work for Pepco Holdings, in particular for Delmarva Power.
Okay, and with respect to gas and why we're here today, what are the responsibilities of your position at working for Delmarva?
Well, my title is Manager of Gas Supply and Transportation, so I'm responsible for administering the contracts for both the supply of commodity and the transportation of that commodity to Delmarva, as well as administering the hedge program and any other contracts associated with the GCR.
And when you say commodity, we're talking natural gas, right?
That's correct.
And you do electric work as well, do you not?
Yes, I do. Electric and renewables.
So you obviously have some knowledge about the settlement of the stock. Were you involved in it, and were you also involved in the preparation of the application and the discovery and the work with staff at DPA?
Yes, I was.
And did you prepare testimony to go along with the filing of the application in this matter?
Yes,
reviewed testimony of other witnesses in this application?
Yes, I have.
All right, and do you need to make any changes in your testimony or the testimony of any of the other Delmarva witnesses?
No.
Okay. And will you adopt your testimony and that of the other witnesses for Delmarva here today?
Yes, I will.
Mr. Jacoby, you heard me just in the opening give a brief explanation about some of the background. Can you just outline the specific terms of the settlement agreement that we're had before the commission today?
Yes, the parties have agreed to implement rates for this year's GCR as filed. That will result in an increase to the customers. Customers served under the classifications of RG, GG, and GL, as well as non-electing MBG customers, will experience an increase in their rate from roughly 45 cents per 100 cubic feet of gas to a rate of 50 cents approximately per cubic foot of gas. The effect of this rate change on the average residential homeowner in a winter month that uses 83 cubic feet per month is approximately $4.40 a month, which is 4.9%. And those are the numbers, the impact on the total monthly bill. The monthly change for service classification GG varies based on the type of usage for those customers. That increase falls in the range from 1.8 to 4.9%. For MBG customers, the increase also varies based on the type of usage. That increase varies from 6% to 9%.
Mr. Jacoby, and we all do this, but you said RG. Could you just explain to them what?
Residential gas.
Okay, and then you talked about GG. Can you tell the commission what that means?
General gas transportation.
And what types of customers are those? Just so they.
Those are the smallest customers. They're your typical residential and your smallest commercial customers.
Okay, and why would they be GG instead of RG?
Depends on the type of service at the location, and whether it's a bundle delivery or whether it's transportation.
And you spoke of GL?
Yeah.
What does that stand for?
Gas, I'm sorry.
Lighting, I believe?
Yeah, gas light.
So, not many of us have these anymore. I did. A little gas light that stays lit and probably costs a couple pennies a month, but there's a rate for that. And then we also have the MBG that you talked about.
That's your medium volume transportation customer.
The larger.
Yeah, they're the medium size, for lack of a better description. They're not your largest industrial customers. They're mid-size apartments, hospitals, those types of institutional customers.
Okay. And then you also said, and we talked about this in the opening, that customers will experience, and the percentages you gave were for a winter heating, correct?
That's correct.
And it's true that they've already experienced that, and now we're down to usually the low usage months?
Yeah, that's correct. This rate went into effect in November, so for the high usage months of December, January, February, those rates were in effect.
Thank you. We also, just talk a little about the hedge meetings that we do, and continue just summarizing this settlement for us.
We have a quarterly hedge call with the DPA and with staff and staff's expert, which really has several purposes. The first is to provide an update on the status of the hedging program, which is used for price protection and to control price volatility of the GCR. But since we have the opportunity to communicate on a quarterly basis, we have added additional information about market conditions. We've added information about ongoing pipeline projects that have the potential to impact our rates. And we also discussed items like reserve margin and return of customers. And those are done on a quarterly basis. We have one upcoming this week.
And those will continue as they have in the past?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you just, I guess you heard a little bit about me talking about
Yeah, in the settlement, there's discussion of reserve margin. I wanted to clarify something that Todd said earlier about this past winter.
This is where I messed up.
The design day is based on a 0-degree day. If you recall back in January, it didn't actually get to 0. It was cold, but it was not 0. So we had adequate gas supply on those days. If the temperature would have gotten to the design day, we would have experienced a shortfall of capacity. So that's why in the planning mode, we opened discussions with staff about adding capacity to get us from the negative 4.28% reserve margin that we currently have after this winter's calculation, to restore that to a plus 2%, which gives us additional margin if those cold days occur. Our whole design philosophy is to design with a safety margin in a number so that there's never a question about having adequate gas supply on the coldest days, based on some reasonable statistical analysis. So the bottom line is we had enough gas this year, but we did not actually hit the design day. And we are proposing to add short-term peaking capacity to address that problem this year. And we are looking at other long-term options to meet those obligations going forward. And when I say long-term, I mean in excess of 2 years. This settlement proposal includes provisions that were negotiated with the DPA and staff, whereby if that gives Delmarva the latitude to enter into a peaking contract that's of a duration less than 2 years and of a quantity such that we do not exceed 2% reserve margin. We asked for that so that we could have reasonable flexibility to procure peaking services for the coming winter. If we see the right opportunity, we want to be able to get it under contract to take care of this winter. And we will enter into a long-term arrangement in the future. But we will address short-term needs first.
And under this agreement, if for some reason we want to enter into a long-term contract, we would still be obligated to go to staff and DPA, seek their approval, correct?
Yeah, absolutely, and our modus operandi is to keep staff and DPA apprised of these activities at the quarterly hedge calls, and we plan on doing that as we go forward.
So modus operandi in Lattice means our regular it's our regular practices to communicate with them even on the short terms, correct?
Thank you.
I'm the one who's supposed to keep the last, not my witness. Mr. Jacoby, in your opinion, will this settlement provide for just and reasonable rates for customers, and is it in the public interest?
Yes.
With that, Your Honors, we believe the evidence has shown that this settlement will provide for just and reasonable rates. Staff and DPA, as they always do, did a not only very careful review, but they worked with us to work out any issues we had about this capacity reserve margin. The same goal, making sure our customers don't face a crisis if it gets colder than expected. So we ask that you determine and recommend, we ask that you hold that this settlement results in fair and reasonable rates. The proposed settlement is in the public interest, and we ask you to approve the settlement agreement after you've heard from staff and EPA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman, Mr. Jacoby. Mr. Willard.
Yes, Your Honor, the staff is recommending you approve this settlement agreement as well, and we'd like to call Ms. Malika Davis to testify.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and business address for the record.
Malika Davis, 861 Silver Lake Boulevard, Cannon Building, Suite 100, Dover, Delaware, 19904.
Okay, by whom are you employed,
The Delaware Public Service Commission.
and what is your position with them?
I'm a public utility analyst.
And in connection with your employment, have you performed a certain review and investigation in this particular docket?
Yes.
And as part of your duties, did you on January 11th, 2018, file testimony on behalf of the commission staff in this docket?
Yes.
I would note that Exhibit 4 has been pre-marked as Ms. Davis's testimony that was filed in this docket. Ms. Davis, are you familiar with Exhibit 4?
Yes.
And what is this document?
That is my direct testimony.
And did you prepare that testimony yourself?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or modifications or corrections to your testimony or any of the exhibits in order to ensure that the documents are true, correct, and accurate as of today's date?
I do not.
If I were to ask you the same questions contained in your pre-filed testimony, would your answers today be the same?
Yes, they would be the same.
And do you adopt your pre-filed testimony marked as Exhibit 4 for your testimony today?
Yes.
The staff moves for the admission of Exhibit 4 into the record.
Any objection? Hearing none,
None.
it's entered.
Ms. Davis, did the staff retain any experts for this docket?
Yes, we retained Exeter Associates, Mr. Jerome Mierswa, along with the DPA to assist in our review.
Are you familiar with Mr. Mears's testimony filed on January 16th?
I am.
Do you have any changes, modifications, or corrections to his testimony at this time?
I do not.
Do you adopt his testimony, which has been marked as Exhibit 5, as your testimony in the hearing today?
I do.
Staff moves for the admission of Exhibit 5 into the record.
Any objections? Hearing none, it's entered.
Were you involved in the negotiations on behalf of the commission staff that led to this settlement agreement that's been marked as Exhibit 7?
Yes.
Do you believe the proposed settlement results in just and reasonable rates in the public interest?
I do.
Could you please explain your reasons for that?
Yes. Staff recommends that the rates proposed by the company in their application be approved by the commission, be finalized. Staff reviewed the application and supporting documentation that was provided by the company and found that the proposed GCR rates were just and reasonable and that they were calculated correctly and in accordance with the company's tariffs. Additionally, the settlement incorporates provisions regarding the capacity reserve margin and additional upstream pipeline capacity. Staff believes these provisions set forth adequate reserve margins and protect GCR customers from paying costs related to transportation customers.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Ms. Davis is now available for cross-examination.
Your Honor, I have no cross, but I should note that after Mr. Willard went through and did a very thorough job introducing staff's exhibits, I would just ask, and I believe you have agreement, that all the exhibits in the in the exhibit list that you have, we all stipulated their admissibility. So for the record, I ask that all the exhibits in the witness list be accepted as admitted by the commission.
No objection.
No objection.
They're admitted into evidence. Mr. Willard, that's
it for us.
Mr. Slater?
I'm going to be really brief, so you're welcome. Just get to the point. We're a party to the settlement, and we believe this is in the public interest and results in just and reasonable rates, so we would ask that the commission approve this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slater. You might tell Regina that we have no objection if she wants to extend her vacation.
We're not done today yet.
That's true, that's true.
I have no cross for Mr. Slater. I'd love to, but I have no cross.
Sure.
I was going to try and put myself up as a witness, but I was concerned about the questions you might ask.
Is there anything further in this docket? Commissioners? Commissioner Drexler?
Yes, please.
My question's for Mr. Jacoby. Every year, there's a supply plan, I'm assuming, and you come up with the projected design day send-out, and this resulted in the breach or the potential breach because of the bomb cyclone. Is that your experience in the past, that these potential breaches happen? And typically, when you prepare the supply plan, is the 2% margin pretty accurate? I mean, my question is, how unusual is this? And next year, when we have really cold days, will this happen again?
Statistically, the answer is it's not likely.
Mhm.
The cyclone bomb event was, I've heard it described as like a 1 in 20 year type cold event. And if you, well, I should say this right, if you're old enough, You'll remember
Like us.
that we used to get more, it seemed like the winter weather seemed more severe back in the 70s and 80s. You know, I'm just, you know, and the design day is based on historical data. So when these anomalies happen, it kind of resets that number. So prior to, if you remember the last time we had a significant event was polar vortex, probably 5 years ago. That, as extreme as it was, did not reset our design day. This one did because of the length of the event. It ran over a much longer period. If you remember, the vortex event was like 3 really bad days, then 10 days off, then 3 really bad days. This event was more solid duration, and because of that, it reset the calculation, much more so than the vortex did. And just to follow up, we calculate that each September when we update the supply plan. So there's always the potential that it's gonna change, but usually it only is moved by significant events like the bomb cyclone.
Thank you.
Mr. Gray. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Currier?
Mr. Jacoby, 2 comments. One is that you mentioned about the picking arrangement for the short term, and
Yes.
while you are still working on the long term, I like that very much, because that will definitely benefit the customers, because you have the picking arrangement ready for next year and winter after. So I like that picking arrangement concept very much. I also like your hedging program, because in long run and in short, it is in the interest of the consumers. So thank you for doing both of those things.
I would comment that we should thank staff for the hedging program as well. It underwent a large change years ago, and staff was very critical to that.
Absolutely
If
correct.
you're old enough, you would remember that. You would remember that docket, but it was reset thanks to their work with the late, great Mr. Lee Lash.
And just further comment, the peaking service is the same result of these quarterly hedge calls. You know, we always make the commission aware of all the opportunities that are presented to us for capacity. And as we went through this settlement process, that was something that, you know, the staff and their expert were also very interested in, was pursuit of the peaking option. So it's been a collaborative effort.
One quick question, Mr. Chair. I think it's a great agreement. I appreciate the effort put into coming to the terms. The question I have is, out of your short-term peaking, long-term options that come out of this agreement, are there any capital assets being planted, like pipeline, storage facilities?
We are considering all of those. We have, for long-term options, we could enter into a long-term firm pipeline capacity agreement, which is 24/7, 365 capacity. We could build a physical asset on our own territory, and we're actually looking at a project like that right now. The primary benefits of that type of project is we would control it. We could determine how many days a year we use it, you know, how it's staffed, how the thing is built. The third option would be a conventional peaking contract, which is someone else sells us their peaking capacity for, say, 10 days a year, as opposed to a 365-day-a-year contract. The problems with that are you only have the rights to that for 10 days, or whatever you buy, 5 days, 10 days, 15 days. So we're looking at all of those options and the costs of them and the benefits, and as we move forward, we'll be presenting the discussion to the staff at the quarterly hedge calls, and then presenting the one we think is the best option.
Very good, thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
we have a motion, please? That it would-
Mr. Chair, I move that the commission endorse and support the proposed settlement agreement as presented today.
And make a finding it's in the best interests of the consumers, et
Yes,
cetera.
that's
I
fine.
second it.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any in opposition? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Is there any, thank you, Mr. Jacoby, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Ms. Davis, it's nice to see you again at the front table. And thank you, everyone. Is there anyone from the public here today that wishes to make any public comment? I would like to recognize Lori Murphy-Lee from PJM, who is present. Anthony for being here, Lori. Marissa Slayton from Delmarva/Exelon, thank you so much for being present. Is there anybody else here? We got Mr. Noyes was here earlier. Okay. We have Kelly Williams here from the city of Wilmington. Is she here? Kelly, welcome. She's the,
A comment, if you don't mind.
sure, please.
Thank you. My name's Kelly Williams. I'm the Commissioner of Public Works for the City of Wilmington. And I was asked to come today just to make a comment about some of the Delmarva work that's going on in the city and the quality of the work and the customer complaints that we've been getting because of the road cuts that have been happening throughout the city. In March, there was what we call what we've been calling it the geyser. So on 13th Street near Walnut, a Delmarva subcontractor was working on an unmarked line and hit our water main. We lost almost 2.2 million gallons of water. It went up probably 5 stories. It started to shut down the adjoining hospital, and that prompted some questions from the public regarding work that Delmarva has permission to do in the city and what kind of quality of work that they're doing with respect to some of their gas line replacement program. So I just wanted to speak a little bit to that. That main break was repaired quickly. Nobody had to evacuate from the hospital. Delmarva's response to that incident was that it was completely on the subcontractor. So we're forwarding all of our claims to that subcontractor directly, all the costs that the city incurred with respect to replacing those mains. And then there's also some claims out there with respect to the local businesses that were shut down because of that incident. But in addition to that, the city wanted to point out that there's 232 road cut permits in the last year. So just to put that in perspective, 232 road cut requests come from Delmarva Gas and with respect to their subcontractors. In total, there's only 24 for everybody else in the city. So Delmarva's out there, they're doing their thing, they're replacing their lines, but it appears that they're hiring mostly subcontractors. It's not Delmarva doing the work themselves, and the subcontractors are not following city rules with respect to road restoration and road cuts and things like that. And we, the city, just don't have the staff to police them. So, we have the staff to police 24 or 50 road cuts, but not 230 in a year. We are out there trying, but I continually, on a daily basis, get complaints about the conditions left by some of the Delmarva subcontractors. One of the complaints that I received this week is that Delmarva subcontractors are chaining porta potties to a tree in front of residential houses. Now, we've contacted Delmarva, they seem to have corrected the situation. However, that's not the first time that it's happened. So in some of our less affluent neighborhoods in the city, we get these complaints about porta potties in front of their homes. Another complaint is that the subcontractors are leaving big piles of rocks and debris in the middle of the street, just leaving it there and getting to it, you know, a week, 2 weeks later. And lastly, there's one particular street, Washington Street, that has probably 25 to 30 parallel road cuts directly in the middle of the street, and the condition of them has been abhorrent over the winter months. We've asked them to come. They've made some repairs and have improved it a little bit, but they have yet to mill and pave the road completely. So I don't mean to come here and just sort of complain and let out, you know, air all our grievances, but I was asked to come and discuss some of these issues before the commission, just to make you guys aware of what's going on in our small but dense city. So, thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Ms. Williams, very much for coming in and informing us as to what's going on in the city of Wilmington. And thanks to Commissioner Gray for his efforts on behalf of the city of Wilmington. You gonna stay around for a little bit, or you?
Sure.
Okay, because I think we're gonna obviously hear our acting executive director has got a few words to say and introduction, and we'll get on with this part of our agenda.
Thank you, Chair Winslow and Commissioners. Appreciate that excellent introduction by Ms. Williams regarding the first item under Director's comments, which was concerning the water service strike in Wilmington on March 1st. And we asked Marisa Slayton from Delmarva to come and just give the Commissioner an overview of what happened and the efforts Delmarva has made to repair that specific situation, and also discuss in general restoration regarding those types of incidents.
Welcome, Ms. Slayton.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'd like to invite to join me representatives from Rowe Bros who are here today, the subcontractors that were doing the work in Wilmington on March 1st, to speak directly to the incident that Ms. Williams just addressed. So if there are representatives from Rowe Bros, I ask you to come forward now. I believe Greg Nettles is here as the Vice President. And I'd also ask to join me at the table Kristen Stanfill. She is one of our senior engineers. And so, Commissioners, I thank you for the opportunity to address you today. And I also want to thank Ms. Williams for her comments. And I would welcome the opportunity to speak with her further after this and on an ongoing basis. Because it's very important to Delmarva that we have an open dialogue with the city and a constructive conversation, so that issues that do arise can be addressed efficiently and in a safe and timely manner. We don't want to have issues that are lingering out there that affect the safety or comfort of the residents in Wilmington. Coming today, we were prepared to talk about the March 1st incident. Some of the things that Ms. Williams mentioned were the first time I'm hearing them, so I would ask for the opportunity to follow up with her directly to learn more about the details of some of those examples that she did mention. I think in preparing for today, we were going to focus on the contractor selection process, the events surrounding the March 1st water main break, and our process in terms of working with the city and also paving and repairing the street roads. But because it seems like the interest of the commission is very focused on the event and our process around engaging the city, I'd like to zero in on those, if that's all right with the commission. But one thing, maybe one or two things that I do want to mention is that and Mr. Nettles will speak more specifically to this. But it is a requirement of Delmarva and something that we take very seriously and hold our contractors to, that we comply with all of the safe digging requirements. We comply with Miss Utility. And so Mr. Nettles will speak directly to that and give examples of how the company did comply with those requirements and the communication that we had with the city. He'll also speak to the marking of the lines, and that the stub that was hit was not actually marked. The water main itself was marked, but the thing that was hit was not marked. And I think that's an important distinction to make because it demonstrates how we were following, or how the contractor was following the rules. And I also just want to just emphasize for the commission also that there are a lot of contributing factors. Following the hit, there was an investigation conducted. There are things that we recognize can be done better, and there's a process of continual improvement. And so in this instance, and I know that Will Bros has worked with the residents that were impacted, that the insurance company and claims has been contacted. But this is not an issue of, liability and not liability. I don't want to get into a whole lot of legal terms and discussion here, but rather what can we do collectively to ensure that the needs of the citizens of Wilmington are being met and that Delmarva is being responsive. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Nettles to speak to the March 1st incident.
Good afternoon, Mr. Nettles.
Good afternoon. Thank you guys for having us in here this afternoon. Go ahead and start with a little bit of scope of work description. Wilrose crew was assigned to encapsulate bell joints, existing 16-inch gas main, one of the bigger ones through here for us. So, called in Miss Utility tickets on December 13th. Tickets cleared, and Wilrose crew began working on this portion of the work. So, that's fine. I thought it all right. We were looking at
Helpful for you to
a
have.
board here.
This is just the restoration.
Yeah,
The whole thing's in here?
no, this is just that. I don't.
You don't need this?
Okay.
Presentation for the board set up.
Color page. The color.
Our understanding was it would be put up on the board, maybe we misunderstood. The staff,
Yeah, if you want to. Where they put the presentation up.
sorry, I thought it'd be easier for you to follow along with the presentation if you had it before.
Your Honor, if you would, I would like to introduce Richard Walker. He is our safety manager, works out of the Baltimore area. We did have him since it is part of our safety program, and the incidents occur with this. The investigation was done by him. I'll let him go ahead and proceed with the presentation once it is ready here. And I believe it is. So.
Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say, sorry. Again, my name is Richard Walker. I'm the safety manager for the Baltimore, Delaware area. I'm in charge of all the training, of all the Miss Utility laws, all of our new hire orientation, and things like that. So
Excuse me.
Oh, I'll go over here, sorry. Is that a little better?
Yes.
Okay. So again, like Mr. Nell said, we did call in a Miss Utility ticket on December 13th. It did clear, and we began work on 13th Street in Washington. Okay, we are out there to encapsulate bell joints on a cast iron gas main. It usually takes about 2 to 3 days to do one encapsulation due to the depth of main, which is about 6 feet deep. We had performed 28 other encapsulations prior to this event without an issue. After encapsulation is done, we follow the proper backfilling procedures and temporary patch until permanent patch repair can be made. The crew was working next to a bell joint, and the distance between each bell joint is about 12 feet.
and the main has remained 6 feet in depth throughout this project. If you go to the next slide, please, thank you. On March 1st, 2018, approximately 9 a.m., Wellbros, working on a 1300 block of Washington Street, hit an unmarked 2-inch water service. It was not the main. Right, which in doing so, it pulled the corporation stop, which is the service, if you will, that comes out of the main that feeds a building or a structure of some sort. Once we did that and the water began to flow, we stopped work immediately. Wilbros contacted all major utilities and municipalities, including Wilmington Water, Police, and Fire Department, responded to the scene. Our supervisor that is out here overseeing the crews responded. There was a phone call to me. There was some delay in getting the water shut off due to their responders not able to locate the proper valves to shut the water main off, so there was a delay. Once they found one of the valves, we helped them excavate, or if you will, suck, that's a poor word, vacuum excavate the tower of the valve due to debris and dirt that was in that valve. I don't know if that valve was actually used to shut the water off. That information is still out there, but we did get the water shut off safely. For safety purposes, Delmarva turned off the power to 1401 Northwest Street, which is a house that was flooded, that was more than 2 blocks away. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Wilbur's safety manager, that would be a safety management incident response team, was notified. The basement at 1401 Northwest Street, as mentioned, housed 5 different tenants, and again was over 2 blocks away. City code compliance inspector condemned the building due to the flooding and damage to the water heaters, the furnace, a flooded heating oil tank, and no electricity in the dwelling. Wilbur's incident response team immediately placed the tenants in a nearby hotel until repairs could be conducted. Provisions were made for immediate food and necessities by myself and Wilbur's. Wilbur's then turned all this over to our insurers to handle the matter further. Our insurers assumed management responsibilities and took over all the expenses and claims and negotiations. Throughout this process, our insurers notified and were kept in constant communication with the residents of this house, all 5 different tenants, and kept them on a timely manner of repairs, on what was being repaired and when and things like this. On the 25th of March, our insured communicated with all the homeowners or residents and told them that they could move back into their house due to the repairs being complete. Our insurers are still working with them in regards to miscellaneous items that may need to be repaired, grocery bill or things like that, loss of groceries and things like that that may have been damaged in regards to the loss of power or any other issue with that. Some of our contributing key factors was this, again, the water stub was unmarked. We did some research and found in a historical website that back in 1970 there were buildings at this location where the stub ran to, all right, and is no longer there. It is a parking lot for the hospital. Again, the 2-inch water service was unmarked and still active. There was no marks or other indications on the ground that water service existed, and we have not yet found where the water service terminates. It goes into a parking lot, and that's all we know. The water and gas mains have maintained a 6-foot depth, and crew maintained a 24-inch clearance at all times, including when they struck the unmarked water stub. Operators snagged the water stub 3 foot in depth, which then pulled it again out of the water main. Although Wilbur's crews came across multiple unmarked abandoned stubs, all inactive. All these other stubs were inactive and water-free. So previously to this, we had dug up stubs and there was no water. They weren't attached to the main. They were actually completely abandoned. Crew visually observed stubs and that were not attached to the water and confirmed that they were abandoned at the main. A couple of next slides are some pictures that show next to the hole, if you will, and the direction that the water service was running. Granted, this one is wet and a lot of water ran over this, but again, there are no marks on the ground to show that that water stub even existed for us to know. The next photograph is a further away view in the direction that the water service was running. Again, there are no missed utility marks on there in the color of blue that show that there was something there that we should have investigated prior to excavating. The next photo, please, if you would. Across the street, from this incident directly across the street, we show that a fire hydrant was marked. Okay, showing that the utility company was out there marking utilities. Next photo, please. Again, it's hard to see in this picture, but to the left of the gentleman in the bright clothing, there are 3 marks for water service valves that run into that building that are marked at the curb.
If this helps, I know you're kind of far away. Here's the gentleman, and those are the 4 blue, that's how water service lines are run.
Thank you. Next photo, just another angle showing that where the parking lot is, if you will, and that we do, we were digging out this is not our piece of equipment behind the pickup truck there. That is actually the water department's vehicle. But we do have equipment out there that we do soft dig, if you will. It's a big vacuum, shop vac, if you will, that we use to remove dirt and earth to locate utilities. All right. Process and improvements from my investigation, or Wilbur's investigations, if you will. Delaware Damage Prevention Program, we teach this at all of our new hire orientations. We have a monthly stand down, if you will, and we preach this on a monthly basis, whether we are in Delaware, Baltimore, or anywhere else that the company works. The Utility of Delaware implemented, and we adhere to them. This training is included in all of our onboarding, new hire, safety orientations. Wilbur's requires safety department, some of our improvements that we are going to be doing, Wilbur's will require safety department and audit crews to perform work in the field. Wilbur's supervision and safety manager will increase our supervisory audits in the Delaware area to ensure Wilbur's employees are following all proper safety and quality rules, regulations, including Miss Utility of Delaware laws. Miss Utility ticket tracking will be taken over by our White Marsh office. That's basically where we're located out of. We're out of White Marsh, Maryland, where our home office is for this particular area. Our field implementation of locations and scheduling will still be performed by our general foreman in charge. This shall be relayed to our White Marsh office for notification and tracking. So we do track all of our tickets. We go through ticket check and all this as well. One of the things that I'm most proud of with our company is we are a member of the Golden Shovel. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of what that is, but basically, it simply put is a Golden Shovel standard is a safety certification and rating system for companies that perform excavation work. Companies that are Golden Shovel standard certified have policies and procedures related to the excavation safety, which when followed, make a certified company unlikely to cause damage to buried infrastructure. More specifically, the company's policies and procedures have been audited to meet the specific requirements of the Golden Shovel Standard program. So we have been a member of this since 2016. We've been certified since 2016. Golden Shovel Standard monitors the historical performance of its participants and awards them an EICO rating, which is an excavation incident calculated occurrence. Basically, it's somewhat like the experience modifier of insurance companies that for businesses, right? While there is many factors that affect the score and also the status of a Gold Shovel Standard certificate, an active status means the company is in with good standing at the time that the letter is mailed to us or emailed to us. So we are, as you can see at the top of the previous slide, we are certified through 2018 as being in the parameters of the Golden Shovel Standard. Any questions?
Mr. Walker, I'd like to, if Mr. Chair will allow me, I'd like to intervene at this point. In the interest of time, I want to put some boundaries around that. And I appreciate the explanation as to what happens. And with every story, there's two sides to a coin. There may be three sides in this case. So I don't think the commission's here to really litigate who's at fault and where the liability is ultimately going to accrue. But what I think is very important from my perspective, once now we've looked at what historically has happened in the past, is to look forward to the future. And I'd like to ask a question that all three entities can help us to answer. So, Ms. Williams, could you come back to the microphone, please, very quickly? Very briefly, from your perspective, you've got the Golden Shovel. As the public interest of the city of Wilmington, Washington Street still remains a demolition derby. It would be great if somebody had the golden asphalt to actually resurface what's been torn up. And so, from the perspective of all three entities, what can be done that gets the streets back in usable condition for the citizens of Wilmington, albeit that you're doing a great job digging them up and repairing and maintaining what's under the surface? So I just need three people who will help answer that one question on behalf of the public interest, the citizens of Wilmington, and the commission. And then I'd like to adjourn this session because the executive director does have other topics that we need to hear. Thank you.
Commissioner Gray, I'm going to ask my colleagues from Delmarva to address that question.
In regards to the,
Name, ma'am, you are.
my name's Kristen Stanfeld. I am a senior engineer at the gas department. Currently, we are working with the state in the 1300 block for a path forward. We have been out there doing exploratory work to try to find the seams, which is what the state had asked us to do. They want us to replace the base seam to seam. We have been unsuccessful to this point, but we have been out there several times. This morning, we received an email with a path forward on what to replace since we cannot find these seams in the road. So sometime in the next 2 weeks, I believe our restoration contractor said that we will start work, and did he tell us that?
That was the
Your name,
temporary.
sir? Your name?
Robert Kitson, Manager Gas Engineering. So that's a state maintained road, not a city maintained. That we were gonna do temporary restoration and remove the current temporary and do a better job of the temporary restoration that was left during the winter, now that we can get asphalt. So we're gonna hire a state highway contractor to rotomill the road and smooth out the current one. But eventually the road will need to be rebuilt, as Kristen alluded to, where we have to remove the entire concrete base and do it. So it's a very extensive restoration because it's a concrete road with asphalt over top. I believe the road is 24 inches in thickness of concrete.
Just that's very good for, again, the scope of this incident. But in the future, what will skinny down the time frame from the time you dig until the time the street is repaired?
It depends upon the time of year. Again, we had a kind of a presentation, different things of our typical restoration and when they occurred. We believe the issue with this specific job was we started this in December when we can't use plates and the asphalt plants are shut down. So that was why the patches failed, because we can't get permanent restoration that stands up to the winter, just as in other areas. As far as like the road cut permit process, Delmarva pays a fee for those. The city of Wilmington does not put their projects in there, so that does not account for all the work in the city of Wilmington. But we've tried to work in several different avenues to improve the process. So one process we're working with was the city, is paying the city to repave certain blocks. But the majority of the projects we do in conjunction with the city. So despite, the same contractors that Delmarva uses are the exact same contractors the city use. So in a lot of streets, we'll have the contractor replace the water main on one side of the street, the gas main on the other side. So from the customer's perspective, or the residents, that project takes a long time. Like take the city 3 months to do their piece, 3 months to do our piece, and then sometimes we run into the cold weather where we cannot do that. The majority of the services are done by Delmarva crews, not by contractors. They typically do the main, and our crews do the services. So there's a conjunction of efforts that we do with other people, but the projects do take a year to complete. Washington Street in particular is more than one project. It's supposed to be repaved by the state, and that's has been delayed as we've done different projects on there. So
Thank you very much. Mr. Watt?
Yes, sir.
Same questions. Is there anything on your side? I know you're doing the digging side, but do you have any contribution or involvement in the restoration?
We do temporarily repair it. Again, like Mr. Kitson said before, it's a winter time, we can't put any steel plates down. I mean, we could possibly do a hot patch, if you will, but then again, trying to get asphalt in the winter is very difficult as the plants are shut down.
Okay, thank you.
We can discuss with Delmarva our.
Yes.
Yes, Greg Nettles again, if I may. We only do the temporary backfill on this. We backfill and then we put temporary paving out there. Once everything is complete, then Delmarva will do that. But we are only assigned out to the temporary paving at this point. So we could have access to more permanent paving at some point in time, but right now we are just at that temporary paving.
Commissioner Williams, thank you.
From the city side, what we're looking for really is just Delmarva to do a better job of policing its own work. So if they're out there, I feel like if Delmarva were out there looking at the conditions of whether it's their own contractor or their subcontractors and looking at the conditions of these road cuts and the temporary paving, sometimes they're backfilled, sometimes they don't even put crush and run in it in different areas. So we've been finding a myriad of issues with that. That's what the city would like to see, is really Delmarva take ownership for what it's doing in the street and not rely on the city to sort of complain first and then react to our constituent complaints.
So it sounds like each of you will exchange business cards if you've not previously met and seek an opportunity to collaborate for better outcomes in the future. Thank you very much for the time. and for
I have a
being here.
question.
Yes, sure.
I have a question. For Delmarva, given the nature of this street and all the problems, why would you begin a construction in December in the city? Why would you give them a permit to do the work if you can anticipate that all these problems might occur?
it would not be the city that gave, this is a state maintained. The city does not.
It's a DelDOT
So
road.
there's a lot of projects the city does not have jurisdiction over, but that was, again, one of the things that we said we would, well, in the presentation, we said that we would look at, that this type of work would be something that we shouldn't have started in December. So a corrective action for Delmarva would be to look at the type of work and the type of restoration so that this type project would be one that we would not look to start in December. So we believe that was an error on Delmarva's part on Washington Street.
So he's correct. This, both Washington Street and 13th Street are both DelDOT owned. So their request for digging would come through DelDOT, not through the city. So we have no control over whether or not they issue a permit or not.
But are you informed in that transaction loop?
We do get the misutility markouts, but we do not necessarily get informed by DelDOT directly when a request is made. Plus, the request in this case happened in December. That was the initial, when they asked for the markout, and the work didn't happen until March 1st. So it's almost impossible for the city to actually keep track of when they ask for the markout. We go and they mark it out, but it's several months later before the work actually begins. I believe that markout's good for 6 months.
Yeah, well, I live in the city, and so I have a stake in the outcome of your successful collaborations, so I appreciate the effort. Now that it's gotten some attention, I'm very hopeful that we'll work on scheduling and communication so that we'll definitely get better outcomes. Thank you, Ms. Slayton, for bringing this group to the table.
Commissioner Correa?
Commissioner, does the city of Wilmington issue the business license to the subcontractors who come from Cherry Hill, other states?
No.
No.
No, which is an excellent point. I don't believe that the subcontractors actually apply for a city license. I don't know if they pay the city wage tax or if they're paying the prevailing wage tax. That would be a state issue.
Mr. Slater?
I just have a quick comment. So we've seen a lot of subcontractors for Delmarva and some of the other utilities. And it turns out that the constituents are told by Delmarva Power that they have to talk to the subcontractor, which is typically notoriously difficult to get a hold of. So I guess I have to ask, at what point does Delmarva have some sort of responsibility for the subcontractors that they hire? Well, I appreciate that Wilbros is here. There are many others that don't seem responsive to the constituents. And so this has kind of struck a chord for me because I've had several of these, and the answer from Delmarva has always been talk to the subcontractor, and I think that's wholly unfair to the consumers who then have to try and track down a subcontractor who may not be in state. And there's been several examples of that. So I just would hope that in the future Delmarva would have some sort of responsibility to make the resident and the consumer whole as opposed to making them track down the subcontractor. Thank you.
If I may just respond to the last comment. And it's that Delmarva takes these things very seriously. We value our customers. That's our primary concern, customers and safety. And so we would welcome the opportunity to work with the Advocate's Office and to work with the City of Wilmington to continue this dialogue. It's an important one to have. We're concerned about the road conditions in the City of Wilmington. We're concerned about the timely and proper completion of projects. On a regular basis, on a monthly and sometimes more frequently than that, weekly basis, we will meet with our contractors to ensure that they are upholding work project schedules and scope, and we have continual QA, QC to verify that they're complying with all of our performance requirements and safety requirements as well. But I don't want it to be left with the notion that Delmarva is in any way disconcerted or apathetic to the well-being and welfare of the citizens of Wilmington. But we do look forward to continuing this conversation and having robust dialogue around how we can shorten the time frame on these projects and ensure that everyone is performing to the highest standard.
Thank you, Mr. Hardigan, for also arranging and helping us to bring this matter in front of the commission. Mr. Chair, I don't think there's any other comments. I'd like to call this segment of the meeting to a close.
Ms. Slayton, thank you very much. Mr. Nettles, thank you. Ms. Williams, thanks for coming in. That's too bad we didn't have anybody from the state of Delaware. It might have been informative to have someone from DelDOT here. But best wishes with respect to the coordination and improvement in the service everywhere in the state with respect to these issues. Mr. Hardigan.
Thank you, Chair Winslow. And thanks again to Delmarva and the city for participating in this discussion. The next item on the agenda is for Delmarva Power to update the commission on the company's critical infrastructure protection plan. I would note that this could be a lengthy conversation, so I don't know if anyone needs a break before we
2 minutes, Mr. Chair.
get into
that?
We'll take a 5-minute break.
Where's your PHI presentation? Your PHI?
Oh, it's going to be
And it's funny because, you know, my dad was,
Oh, where their building is?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so, like, sent me.
Actually, it was fun because the CEO supported us with respect to the artificial intelligence. So I was able to thank him for the presence of his board. We had a really good meeting. It wasn't, our comments were long, 10 minutes or so. It was very pleasant, very nice meeting. And this was going to be the same because there's some PGM issues that are populating. And it appears to me that the state's position seems to be pretty consistent with excellent thinking. Absolutely.
This is what Christie was gonna go over, but I know we got short on time. This has photographs and it explains our restoration process. I thought it might be helpful for you to look at that.
Only one house got flooded?
Yeah, it wasn't, it was way down, it was 2 blocks away.
Yeah.
I think it was an apartment complex.
Yeah, that's weird. What if it was down?
No one knew there was houses. And so when the house was knocked down.
A lot of years ago.
Yeah. And the water service.
Wasn't cut off.
And so the city didn't know it was there. And so it was
City service.
and that a customer there so large for us to be back. That's why I think it was smart. And then because they didn't know it was here, they knew it was wrong. And then they explained concrete for the valve to get to the valve. That's why the water.
Right.
I guess it's what happened. The city's so old, you're gonna have that happen.
So it's like south of, I mean, here's House of Watches, but it was in the parking lot next door?
Yeah, I think it was a parking lot for the
Red Clay Consolidated School District?
right in front of the emergency room parking lot,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
houses used to be. And that was an old leftover water service.
It's almost right across from the House of Watches.
Yeah, it's that region. And Will Brothers had found a lot of
And the house you're talking about must have been,
down the hill.
yeah, but it was north of, I think it must have been close to the House of Watches, but north of, or south of it.
South, because
I'll find out.
Well, it's not, maybe Clinton thinks it's important, I don't know.
yeah, no, it's just, I used to live in that neighborhood. So,
Did you live in the house?
yes.
Did you?
It's for sale if you want to buy it, it's actually still there. And they junked it off, because there's other pictures on it.
I'm sure it was very nice when you lived there. You don't have to
So
defend.
nice when we lived there, because the person before us had really done a nice
I'm sure it was
job.
very tastefully decorated.
By the lady before
Clean all
us,
the time.
messy all the time, but nice, it was nice. It's not nice anymore, it's Winchester Place,
It was something that we would
which is a block up, like a half a block up from Frere, it used to be a ballet studio, right next to Willie's place. Literally right next to it. That was my little street, between 13th and 14th, and Orange and Taft. A block over from the house that got flooded.
And I know
We happen to be in our, that, we're going to the other side of the city, had heard what had happened. Said, oh, we're going out Washington. When we made the turn, I looked at Joe and said, that was really smart. Both of us heard the news.
Yeah, I don't think she,
No.
Weird that under the parking lot, and it just had been paved over.
Such is life.
Yeah, scheduling.
It won't shorten the process for those people.
truck thing.
I don't know, asphalt's pretty nasty job in the summer.
Like a hard hat, like a rakey thing.
I don't need one, my head is, I already have steel plates in that.
Do they have to chain those porta potties because people want to steal them or tip them over? So they vandalize the base, like take them?
You have that confidential thing open to the public.
I mean, the city, I understand why they don't speak to contractors, change the word. Why would they do that?
Right, right.
Well, they don't want to come back and find their.
But they want to deploy them. They're not gonna, yeah, they're gonna push the deployment.
Apparently, they're also used as convenient places to do illegal things.
Yep.
Fun.
That, right.
Break the porta potty?
They find all sorts of stuff.
Syringes and stuff?
Sure they do.
Not an easy job. Plus, I don't think it's much.
Right.
I don't go into this voluntarily.
It's like having an extra half captain. But, so people do
Some people do that. Yeah, some of them do that too. That's horrible. You ever been in one of those?
Well, of course,
Well, they ventilate. But if you're in the community and you got 5 people lined up.
They're doing water, then they're doing sewer, then they're doing gas. It goes on forever.
They need those porta potties for point to point, point to point line up launch with someone. With seasonal honey. There's some milk.
I saw one point of time.
They have pumpable.
Yeah, Wilmington Trust, when we sponsored the fireworks, Wilmington Trust side, they were nice about it. Nice. And were the lines long?
No, they have to lock them. They have to lock them.
We were there for
Oh, okay.
we turn up in strange. Strange.
So you married Joe many years ago and you didn't know that. And he will go on finishing.
I sold the building.
Yeah. It's been 8 years since that.
800 block park. On the same side. Chelsea.
Yes, it is. It's hard for us to put up with each other.
Market.
Yeah.
Yeah. My eyes are cracking up.
Where, what's in here?
Everybody ready?
So I'm sitting here.
Any props?
Yes, I did, I put them in.
Yeah.
Let's get back together again, please, and get ourselves started. Mr. Hartigan.
Thank you, Chair Winslow. At this time, I'd like to invite Marisa Slayton back to talk about the Marlboro Power's Critical Infrastructure Protection Plan, and also welcome David Weaver and Michael Cormos from Exelon, and Lori Murphy-Lee and Steve Hurling from PJM.
Who's in charge? Mr. Hurley, you in charge? Or Mr. Weaver's in charge?
You're going to kick us off.
I'm in charge.
Mr. Slayton's in charge.
I see the executive director raising his hand.
Suggest we go into executive session, Mr. Chairman.
Immediately? Well, is there going to be some representation from you, Mr. Hartigan, with respect to why we need to go into executive session? I mean, I believe I know, but I think we need something for the record.
Yes,
I can make a statement.
thank you.
For
Chairman.
point of order, Mr. Chair, can we introduce the presenters first and then we'll take a motion? Is that suitable, or?
Sure,
Should
it's-
we also put them on the executive session record?
Well, I'm waiting to hear from Ms. Slayton about exactly what the particulars are here, so.
All right.
Thank you once again, Commissioners. I have with me today, on behalf of Exelon Corporation, Mike Kormos and Dave Weaver, both representing our transmission organization. And from PJM, joining me today is Steve Erling and Lori Murphy-Lee. The topic of today's presentation is to provide the Commission with an overview and solicit your input on NERC standards focusing on critical infrastructure. And in particular, we'll be discussing those assets which, if lost, would cause significant outages in our region. So because of the confidential nature of today's information, we are requesting that we go into executive session.
Now, with respect to the information, is all of it critical information confidential, or is there a portion that can be done publicly that's not confidential?
I think that the information is so interwoven that it would not be practical to bifurcate the presentation.
Okay. So, who's going to be presenting then? Mr. Weaver is
Mr.
going to be
Weaver.
presenting?
Yes.
Okay.
And Commissioners, I would also note that the presentation that I just handed out is also considered confidential security information, and so we'd like to collect that back at the end of today's session.
May I, Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair, I move that the commission go into executive session for the purpose of discussing confidential security information related to transmission resilience.
Second the motion?
Is there any discussion on the motion to go into executive session? I would just state that it would appear that, who's representing us on this particular matter? Mr. Willard? It would appear pretty clearly to me that the information involved is confidential and would be very sensitive information, and that does in fact comply with the Freedom of Information Act exemptions for a public meeting. Could we confirm that for the record, please?
Yes, Chair Winslow, Tom Walsh. The cyber information to be discussed is not, does not fall within the definition of a public record for purposes of FOIA, and therefore is